And now we are going to talk about the state. State has been very critical part of React components, only for the class components actually. As we already had mentioned that this argument on the component is for state. Okay, state is particular for classes. Okay, uh, and it is very tightly coupled to the life cycle of React components. Okay, so similar to counter props, we are going to have another type as counter state. Okay, and here I'm having another value as let's say state val, and I'm going to consider this type as number as well, and then I'm going to use this as parameter for this. Okay, and it's better to display the value directly from the state instead of props actually. Okay, so we can have this dot state. State is available with classes the moment we use component actually. So we can use state as a variable inside the class, or the props both. See, props is also available and also state, so they are both available as part of the class the moment we use component. Okay, so we can use this as state dot state val. TypeScript is also suggesting us. Okay, and now we need to display this value. So whenever we use state in a class, we have to initialize the state value. Okay, for that we need to use the constructor, and this constructor is going to take one argument, and that is going to be props. Okay, and the props type is going to be our counter props. Inside we need to call the super. Okay, and we need to pass the iProps. That's it. And then we need to initialize the state. Currently the state does not have any data, so if we print this, so this won't print anything. So if I save this and I go back to the browser, we have the type error, cannot read property state val of null. Okay, so in order to resolve this, we have to initialize this value. So we have to do this by this dot state equals to the same data type that we have. This should have a state val, and I'm going to initialize the value with 20. Okay, so now we have the data here. Let's come back and see. We have the 20 value being printed. Okay, so this is how we can use state, and there are much more to this when we use state actually, so I'll cover one by one. Okay, so this is the counter class, and in addition to this value, I'm going to have a button here. Okay, and I'm going to name this button as increment. Okay, so and I want to have an action to this button, and the idea is when I click this increment button, it should increase this value. Okay, before I do that, I can also give you another idea that usually what happens is whenever we are getting a value from through the props, we use those values to initialize the states. So we can do the similar kind of things here. I'm going to initialize the state val as this dot props dot val. So this is inserting the value 10, which is coming from its parent or whoever it is calling the class example. Okay, so now this would initialize the 10 value into state val, and the same val we will see here. If we go back to the browser, we can see 10, and we are also seeing the new button we have added, increment. Okay, all right, and I think we can add some space here. The idea is I can use this as a label. Okay, that would help us to add some space in a cleaner way. Okay, so yes, we have the space now. And to use this button's action, we need another function here, and I'm going to call that function as do increment. Okay, and this function is going to be called whenever we click this increment button. Okay, and to do that we have to pass this as this dot do increment. Okay, and inside this we would be incrementing the state val and inside the state. And whenever we use any method that is going to use the state or any any property of the class, we have to bind them. Okay, this dot do increment equals this dot do increment dot bind, and we have to call this. So this will help React or the class to identify in which context it is going to call do increment. When we click on this and when we call this, so it will call this method, but it won't have the context values. Okay, these state values might be different. Okay, and not might be, they will be different. So in order to avoid that, we have to bind this class with the the function. Now we would be able to use this, and this is not the only way to bind the functions. We can also use arrow functions, so we can do something like this as well. Okay, this will also do the same thing. Okay, so currently I'm going with the constructor way. I'm just sticking to basic function for now, just to keep the code clean. It's again, it's it depends on individual how someone wants to use it, but they both serve the same purpose in this case at least. Okay, and now I'm going to increment the state val. To do that, I have to use this dot set state. So here is the thing to notice. So when I had initialized the state val, I had to call this dot state equals, then I had specified the object. But now when I have to update anything inside the state, we are not allowed to use this dot state. This dot state should be called only inside the constructor. Okay, and when we have to initialize or update any value inside the state, we have to use this dot set state. This dot set state is going to take a function, and that function is going to have earlier, I'll give you some information about what earlier we used to do. We used to have it like this. Okay, sorry, just an object, and spread this dot state so that existing values would be copied, and then we used to override the state val as let's say 50. Okay, so what this used to do is this used to copy the entire all the values inside the state, and then we used to override the specified fields, in our case state val. If we had multiple values here and we wanted to override just one value, this was the way to do it. Okay, but now things have changed. So now what we have to do is we are going to pass a function here. Okay, and that will take as the state and sorry, this is going to take an argument as state, and that is going to be a function. Okay, inside this function we can update state val state dot state val plus 1. Okay, so now this is going to work, and this is how we should update a state. Okay, so again, see, we are passing another object here. So this usually takes a function. So a function, and then the function body we have. The function should return a JSON object. Okay, I'm saving this. Okay, we already have a compilation error, and let's see what the compiler says. Expected an assignment to a function call inserted saw expression. Okay, I think I have done it wrong. Okay, so this should return an object like this. We can send. I hope the compiler is happy now. Yes, compiled successfully, and I'm happy too. Okay, now let's going back to our browser. We are seeing that we have the 10, which is coming from the class example, and then we have the increment button. So now when I click on the increment, it increments the number. Okay, so this is how exactly it is happening. So we have to keep in mind that whatever value we are, or fields or variables we are going to use, that is going to be used for the display or for any any use inside the component class, we should use that in the state. Let's not use instance variable. I mean, we can initialize something like this, my val, and it's going to be any. Okay, we are allowed to use this. We can also use the same thing here like this. Okay, this dot my val equals 100, but in that case React won't be able to utilize this this value in its complete complete form. Okay, so this won't be part of the React lifecycle, and that will lead to inconsistency in this field. Okay, so you might be expecting some value to be populated under specific conditions, but when you use this kind of instance variables, so that will not give you the consistent behavior. It may give you a corrupt data. So we should not use instance variables inside React components. Okay, I'm deleting this. Another important thing to note here is every time we update the state, this is going to invoke the render method internally. Okay, just to see that in action, I'm adding a console.log inside render, and I'm printing a message, render called. Okay, I'm saving this, and then I'm going to the browser. I'm opening the console. Okay, so this has already called render as part of the component lifecycle process. And now I'm going to click on this increment button. Okay, so when I click on increment, immediately we see that this render called message has printed. That means the render function has been invoked. Okay, I click on this increment button again it prints the render method. Okay, I'm clearing the console. Again, I click increment. This has again printed. So what we understand from this is every time we are updating the state, it is invoking the render method. Okay, so from this we have to be very cautious or very careful while calling the setState method. So ideally we should call the setState method only when we have all the necessary data available with us. then we go ahead and update the state. We should avoid updating these state for any unnecessary reasons. Okay, so we should call the state only when we have all the important information available to render in the UI. Okay, so that's it for this section. Moving to the next.